There was never any question that I was going to make the sequels. And once the film was a giant hit, which was like, I finally accepted it about a month after it was released. I said, okay, it's a hit. I can now go ahead. I can make my other movies. I'm going to do this. I realized, one, that this was a perfect opportunity to become independent of the Hollywood system, which is financially independent. So I did not want to have to go back to them and ask for more money. I did not want to have them decide which movies I got to make and which movies I did not get to make. I didn't want them to decide what the ending should be or how they should recut it at the end. So that was my primary goal at that point, was to establish an operation up here in San Francisco that was completely independent. I was pretty much independent as it was. I didn't mind releasing it through them, but it was really going to them for the money and them saying, well, the film is good, but we want to make these changes. That's the part I wanted to avoid. So I decided I was going to finance the film myself. I decided I was going to make it completely independently. But in order to do that, I felt I wasn't going to be able to direct it, that it was just too hard to set up a company, get the money, get the film made, and also be down there on the set every day trying to direct it. So I decided I'd hire a director. I would executive produce it, kind of like you do on television, which is I would pretty much oversee the script, and I oversaw the casting, I oversaw the sets and the art design, the special effects and everything, and I'd hire a director to go in and work with the actors and do a day-to-day, get up at 5 or 6 in the morning and work until 10 o'clock at night. I could show up and be on the set when I needed to be, but I could also help build the company, make sure that we were financially independent and deal with all the other issues that had to go on around it. This one is a darker story than the first one. That was a challenge, to make sure that it didn't turn into something that was significantly different than the first film, and that would keep the tone going, since this was designed to be 3 films as one film, and to keep it going as the first film had started, and so that they would be consistent with one another. Each film in this trilogy, Luke goes from being a naive farm boy to learning the ways of the Force. He is on his way at the beginning of this film to learn to use his Jedi powers that Obi-Wan had started teaching him in the first film. But he only had very limited training in that film. But now we see with this snow monster, he's able to use his powers to get his lightsaber back. And as he goes into the snow, he hallucinates and sees Ben again, who establishes that Ben is still guiding him from the Force and helping him to move forward in his quest to become a Jedi. Peter Szyszewski shot in this film, and he used a more diffused look. He used a lot of bounce lighting and that sort of thing, which gives it a much more elegant look. It did take a lot more time and cost a lot more money to achieve that. So, there was a little bit of concern about getting the film done as a result of the look, but it's a softer look in terms of the lighting. A lot of the design work on these films is really just to come up with things that are unique, don't look like things that we've seen, but seem to fit into the situation. Because we have lots of vehicles and creatures and things, it's always a struggle to try to create something that's recognizable as what it is, but is something that looks completely different, but not so far out that you can't even comprehend what it is. The idea of giant walking machines, wasn't that unusual in science fiction, but it was something that I hadn't seen in the Star Wars world yet. So Joe Johnston sat down and did many designs for different kinds of walking machines, and we finally settled on this one. There's a battle, but it's a ground battle, and it's at the beginning of the movie, not at the end of the movie. That, again, just in terms of going against traditional storytelling techniques of putting their big action scene at the end, the big climax at the end. In this particular film, the climax is really a personal climax between Darth Vader and Luke. It involves a sword fight, but it doesn't involve a lot of pyrotechnics and everything. So I wanted this sequence to be exciting and unique, but at the same time, I didn't want it to overwhelm the ending of the movie. When we'd have problems, we could sit down and say, how are we going to solve this problem? We got a thing here. What can we do to kind of streamline things? So there was always a lot of cooperation. We were working very closely together to overcome the obstacles that were slowing us down or causing difficulty. This ended up being about a $30 million picture, whereas Star Wars was only 13. Those things are always a challenge, because ultimately for a director, what you're trying to do is do the best possible job at telling the story. And then Kirsch had some hurdles that there was, I say the story was a continuation. It was a connector between 2 other films. And we talked about that, and he knew that. And so in a lot of the cases, he knew he couldn't end it, or he knew there wasn't an arc that was going to end this thing that he could deal with and say, okay, this is how I'm going to build this, because the final chapter wasn't out there yet. And he had a vague idea of where the final chapter was going, but the specifics, right, hadn't really put down on paper yet. And that was his challenge, was to try to do a better job. And I think it's a more elegant movie than the first one. I really love the sequence with Han Solo in the asteroid field. It's one of my favorite sequences. It's just, visually, it's very exciting, and it's got a lot of humor, and at the same time, the music, the sound effects fit in very well. To me, it's a very successful marriage of a soundtrack and visuals, and it manages to create a lot of tension. And it's funny. Saturday matinee serials, the love story is much more like it is in these first episode 4, 5, and 6. Because the episodes 1, 2, and 3 is a backstory, it has a tendency to be more involved in developing characters and developing plots. This is telling a story. That's just sort of telling where the story came from. And it does put a big shift away from the plot and onto the characters. Because usually what a backstory is just sort of laying out who the characters are, what their problems are, and how they got to be where they are, as opposed to telling a particular story. And that's the sort of the shift between this trilogy and the first trilogy. The first trilogy is about the father. This trilogy is about the son. And even though it's a continuing story that follows sort of the family saga, it does break down to one's the father's story and one's the son's story. I had to come up with another Jedi. I had killed Ben off, who was older and wiser and shorter than Ben, to train Luke. That was the beginning premise of Yoda, and I decided I wanted something very small and very unassuming and very wizened and old and that sort of thing. And so I worked with Joe Johnston, who was my chief designer at that point, along with Ralph McQuarrie. I actually gave them both the assignment. I said, I want a 3-foot-high, wizened little gnome-like creature. And they started drawing various pictures of it as I was writing it. And I would say, I want this one, I don't want this one, make him taller. There's a whole series of drawings of the way he's evolved into what he actually is today. But the essence of the fact that he was this super master teacher, sort of the ultimate Ben Kenobi, stayed there. I think we have green versions and blue versions and all different kinds of versions of him before I finally picked and evolved the version that we've got now. I was using Alec and the Ben Kenobi character as the chief influence. So I want something like this, with the same power and the same strength. We then try to transfer into a puppet. You don't want Darth Vader to be your boss. He's very intolerant of failure. So we normally kill everybody off who fails, except at the very end. There's a lot of similarity sometimes with what Anakin Skywalker would say and what Luke Skywalker says, to keep the idea or the theme moving in terms of their story, how their stories progress. It's the same thing with Obi-Wan. There's a lot of reminiscent things going on between the two films. Different harmonics, so to speak, but it's the same piece of music. And There Are Days in San Francisco looks like this. There's a thematic issue going on here of sort of concentric circles of, they're kind of in heaven, only when they fight, they're in this forgery, this red hell in the middle of this. It's a little capsule, sort of a world within a world within a world, rings of worlds, which is very Eastern in nature. They go to where they think they're going to get sanctuary, and they ultimately find the devil there. There's actually a lot of things like that going on that if you were to peel the movies back, there's a lot of symbolism, a lot of motifs, and a lot of concentric circles going. I didn't want to kill off Han Solo. I mean, Harrison wanted me to kill him off, but he said, no, I'm not going to do that because he has a part to play later on in the next film. I mean, when you're putting together a story, you're dealing with lots of different complexities. Part of them are technical in terms of getting characters to be where they need to be, and you have ideas of where you want things, scenes that need to take place, and how you maneuver your characters around to get them there. And it's especially difficult on a film because they're physical realities, where in a book you can sort of move around much more easily in a literary situation. But the thing about cinema is it works in time. You're going over a 2.5 hour period, and you're moving things around. And obviously part of the art of cinema is learning how to maneuver from place to place, story point to story point, without confusing the audience, but getting that fluidity that comes in really good novels of being able to, through chapter headings or just through stream of consciousness, move people around very fast and put them in a state of mind to get to a particular situation that you want to talk about. In film, you actually are stuck with reality to do that with, and you have a plot and everything, and if you're going to get rid of all your characters, you have to sort of explain how you do that. You can't just do it. This is another Joe Johnston design for the Boba Fett ship. I wanted something that looked completely different from anything we'd ever seen. When you see the films 1 through 6, it's a very, very different experience than seeing it 4 through 6 than 1 through 3. But the idea when Darth Vader comes on in episode 4, it suddenly has a huge, powerful effect because you know right from the get-go that that is Princess Leia's father. You know that when you cut down to Luke, you know that that's his son. And you realize that Darth Vader is this pathetic character. He's not this big, all-powerful monster. He's actually a pathetic man who made some wrong choices, who found himself trapped in the world of evil. You know, he made a bargain with the devil, and now he's living in hell. And the only people that can get him out are his kids. Generally, when I'm working with another director, I say, this is your film, and I put my 2 cents worth in and try to, give my opinions about what I feel is important. And it usually works as a very good collaboration that way, because I'm not sort of lording it over the director with my understanding of special effects and what I thought we could do and couldn't do. So he kind of had a special effects expert on the set with him and helping him develop the way certain scenes went together, because I could tell him what we could and couldn't do it. So I really became more of a helper, more of an expert on the world of Star Wars and an expert in the world of special effects.